When a lonely billionaire watched his disabled son struggle at a fancy gala, he never expected a black waitress to step in, spin him around the dance floor, and shatter every belief he had about love, kindness, and second chances. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Stop that music, shouted Victor Hawthorne, the billionaire no one ever dared to interrupt. Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers sparkled over hundreds of wealthy guests dressed in silk gowns and sharp tuxedos. Waiters in black ties floated like shadows. Among them, balancing silver trays topped with champagne flutes that caught the light like diamonds. A famous jazz band played softly in the corner, their saxophone and piano weaving a gentle spell over the gathering. But amidst all the glitter and chatter sat a small boy with sandy hair and wide blue eyes. Jamie Hawthorne, Victor's only son. Jamie, born with cerebral palsy, struggled to speak clearly and move without help. His wheelchair, sleek and custom-made, was parked near a marble pillar. While other children twirled and chased each other in circles on the polished dance floor, Jamie sat quietly, tapping his fingers in time with the beat. His gaze never left the dancers, boys and girls laughing, spinning, falling into each other's arms. For him, it was a world just out of reach. Victor had spent millions on the best doctors, tutors, and equipment, but all his money could never buy the one thing Jamie really wanted: to be part of that world, to be seen, not pitted, to dance. When the band slid into a livelier tune, Jamie's eyes brightened. His fingers drummed faster on the armrest of his wheelchair. For a moment, he closed his eyes, imagining himself out there, feet strong, legs steady, spinning like the other children. Then, a soft voice cut through the music. "Hey there, sweetheart," said a waitress who'd been watching him from the edge of the room. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with warm brown skin and a gentle smile. Her name tag read Aaliyah. She held an empty tray in one hand and tucked a stray curl behind her ear with the other. Jamie looked up, startled. Most grown-ups either ignored him or gave him that sad, heavy-lidded smile that made him feel smaller. But Aaliyah's eyes didn't carry pity, just kindness. "Do you like the music?" she asked as Jamie's words came slowly, but they came. "Why, yes." Aaliyah glanced at the dance floor, then back at Jamie. She set her tray down, bent so they were at eye level, and said, "Would you like to dance with me?" Jamie's mouth fell open. He looked past her at the dancers, then at his father, Victor Hawthorne, who was glaring at them from across the room. The boy hesitated, fear flickering across his small face. Aaliyah followed his gaze and saw Victor. Arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. She knew who he was. Everyone did, and everyone knew not to cross him. But she didn't look away. She turned back to Jamie and whispered, "Don't worry about him. Do you want to dance?" Slowly, Jamie nodded. Aaliyah smiled. She stepped behind his wheelchair, unlocked the brakes, and gently wheeled him toward the edge of the dance floor. A few guests turned to stare, whispering behind crystal flutes. The jazz band faltered for half a beat, sensing the tension from Victor's glared. That's when Victor barked, "Stop that music!" The room froze. The musicians lowered their instruments. The dancers halted mid-step. A hush spread like spilled wine. Aaliyah felt Jamie tense under her hands. She squeezed his shoulder. Then, with a courage she didn't know she had, she called out, voice clear and strong, "Please don't stop. Keep playing." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A waitress, telling Victor Hawthorne what to do? Victor's eyes narrowed. "Who do you think you are?" Aaliyah held his gaze, her heart hammering in her chest. "Someone who wants your son to have this moment." For a heartbeat, silence. Then, in the corner, the saxophonist lifted his instrument. Again, softly, nervously at first. One note slipped out, then another. The piano followed, then the gentle pulse of the drums. The music returned like a held breath released. Aaliyah knelt beside Jamie. "Ready?" she asked as Jamie's eyes glistened. As he nodded, she took both his hands in hers and began to sway, moving his arms gently to the rhythm. The band, emboldened by the sight, played louder. The guests watched in stunned silence as the little boy in the wheelchair danced, his laughter ringing out for the first time all night. Victor stood rigid, fury and something else, something softer, warring on his face. His fists clenched, then unclenched. He saw his son's joy, his son's light. A joy no doctor or tutor could buy. He saw the kindness of a stranger doing what he, with all his power, could not. As the last notes faded, Jamie beamed up at Aaliyah. He didn't say thank you. His smile said it for him. Aaliyah squeezed his hand. Anytime, sweetheart. Across the ballroom, Victor Hawthorne lowered his head, his eyes wet. For the first time in years, he realized he wasn't the richest man in the room. Not even close. That's when she saw him. Amara Johnson, a young black woman working the gala as a waitress, noticed the small boy near the marble pillar, his wide blue eyes fixed on the dance floor, a soft smile curling at the corners of his mouth. She'd been weaving through the glittering crowd all evening, balancing silver trays stacked with crystal glasses and ducking the sharp orders of demanding guests. Her feet ached in her too tight shoes, her arms burned from carrying endless champagne flutes. But seeing Jamie's quiet smile stopped her in her tracks. She watched him for a moment. While tuxedos and silk gowns swept across the polished floor, Jamie sat perfectly still in his sleek wheelchair, his fingers drumming softly on the armrest in time with the band's gentle jazz. Around him, the chatter of millionaires and socialites filled the air like static. Nobody seemed to notice him, except Amara, between topping off glasses for powerful CEOs and pretending to laugh at snobbish jokes. Amara felt something tug deep in her chest. She thought of her little brother back home, Elijah, who was born with the same challenges. She'd seen that same look in his eyes 1,000 times, the longing to belong, to feel like everyone else for just one moment. Amara knew she shouldn't. Her manager, Mr. Reynolds, was lurking somewhere, always ready to bark if one of the waitstaff dared to stand still for more than 10 seconds. But as she watched Jamie's tiny fingers tap out a secret dance only he could hear, she knew she couldn't just walk away. She checked over her shoulder. No sign of Victor Hawthorne's icy glare, no sign of Reynolds. She slipped closer, careful, not to draw attention. Bending down so her eyes met Jamie's, she said in a soft voice, "Hey there, buddy. Do you like this song?" Jamie jumped slightly, surprised that someone had noticed him. Slowly, he nodded, his sandy hair falling over his forehead. His eyes darted toward the dance floor, then back to Amara, as if he needed permission even to imagine. Amara's heart clenched. She set her tray carefully on a nearby table, ignoring the prickle of fear at what Reynolds might say. She extended her hand toward Jamie, palm open and warm. "How about a dance?" she whispered. Jamie's mouth fell open. For a second, he looked at her hand like it was a ticket to someplace he'd never dared dream of going. Then his eyes flicked across the ballroom, searching. He spotted his father, Victor Hawthorne, the man no one dared to cross, deep in conversation, with a stiff cluster of board members. The boy shrank back slightly, his shoulders tensing. Amara followed his gaze. She'd heard the stories, how Victor had built an empire with iron fists and colder words, how he controlled every detail of this gala, this hotel, maybe even this city. But right now, looking at Jamie's trembling hand, Amara decided she didn't care. She leaned closer and whispered, "It's okay. Just us. You and me." Jamie's lips parted into the tiniest, hopeful smile. Slowly, shyly, he lifted his small hand into hers. "Okay, buddy," Amara said with a grin. She unlocked the brakes on his wheelchair and wheeled him gently toward the edge of the dance floor. Guests turned to stare. A few stopped mid-conversation. Amara ignored them all. She found a little patch of marble near the band, out of the direct spotlight, but close enough for Jamie to feel the music wrap around him. "Ready?" she asked. Jamie nodded, his eyes wide, almost disbelieving. Amara placed her hands over his and began to sway them softly side to side. She hummed along with the saxophone, her voice just for him. The boy let out a tiny giggle, his fingers tapping. Faster, his shoulders loosening as the music carried him somewhere new. A hush began to spread through the ballroom as people noticed. Champagne glasses froze midair. A few guests whispered. The band's pianist caught Amara's eye and, seeing the little boy's joy, softened the melody, weaving a sweeter, lighter tune. Then the spell cracked. Victor Hawthorne's voice cut through the music like a knife. "What is going on here?" His tone froze the band mid-note. Conversations died instantly. The billion-dollar kingpin had spoken. Amara's heart slammed against her ribs, but she didn't let go of Jamie's hands. She turned slowly, meeting Victor's cold eyes. His expression was thunderous, outrage at this defiance, this tiny ripple in his perfect evening. "Mr. Hawthorne, she began, her voice trembling. But Jamie did something neither of them expected. His hand squeezed hers tighter. His chin lifted just a little. "Dance," he whispered, the word pushing through stiff lips but clear enough for Victor and everyone to hear. Victor froze. His gaze shifted from Amara to his son. He saw the light in Jamie's eyes, the flush of pure happiness. For a moment, the great Victor Hawthorne looked small, powerless in the face of something money couldn't command. Amara took a breath, squeezed Jamie's hand back, and said firmly, "We're dancing." The band, sensing the moment, began to play again. Slowly, sweetly, the notes rose, carrying Jamie's laughter with them. And for the first time that night, the grand ballroom belonged to him. The boy's eyes widened. No one had ever asked him that. For a moment, Jamie Hawthorne sat frozen in his sleek wheelchair, staring up at Amara, as if he wasn't sure he'd heard her right. A dance? Him? His gaze flickered anxiously across the grand ballroom, landing on his father. Victor Hawthorne, sharp suit, steely eyes, was locked in an intense conversation with an oil tycoon from Texas, gesturing at something on a marble table between them. The men laughed, oblivious to the small boy at the edge of the room. The boy who had everything except what he wanted most. Amara squeezed Jamie's small, cold hand in hers. "It's okay," she whispered, bending down so he could see her smile. "Tonight's your night, too." Carefully, she leaned over and unlocked the brakes on his wheelchair. The soft click was almost drowned out by the gentle hum of the jazz band, but for Jamie it sounded like the creak of a door swinging open to a room he'd never been allowed to enter. Amara looked around. She could feel the weight of 100 eyes on her. Other waiters paused with trays balanced on fingertips. Guests leaned in to whisper behind manicured hands. "Who does she think she is? Victor will fire her for this. Such a shame, really, but..." Amara didn't care. She pushed Jamie's wheelchair gently onto the very edge of the gleaming dance floor. The chandeliers above spilled golden light across the polished wood, turning the floor into a stage just for him. She slipped around behind him, adjusted his small shoulders so he sat up a little taller, then moved to his side and knelt beside him. "Ready?" she asked, her voice a secret between just the two of them. Jamie hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. His eyes, wide and blue as a summer sky, shimmered in the light. Amara felt her chest tighten. She thought of her brother Elijah, how he would light up whenever she spun him in his old wheelchair in their tiny living room. For a moment, it felt like she was home again. With one hand, she pushed Jamie's chair gently into a slow, smooth circle. With the other, she held his small hand and began to hum along with the saxophone's mellow tune. The band, sensing something special was happening, leaned into the melody. The drummer softened his brush strokes on the snare, the bassist plucked gently, and the saxophonist closed his eyes, weaving notes that wrapped around Jamie and Amara like silk. Jamie's laughter spilled out, sudden, bright, unfiltered. A sound so pure that even the chatter at the bar fell away. A couple who'd been arguing stopped mid-sentence. The gossiping guests at the front tables turned in their chairs, glasses frozen halfway to their lips. Amara gave Jamie's hand a little swing and twirled him again. He squealed in delight. His fingers tapped the air, mimicking the rhythm only. He could hear in his head. She leaned closer and whispered, "You're the best dancer here. You know that?" He giggled so hard his shoulders shook. It was the loudest sound he'd made all night. Louder than the jazz now, louder than the crystal glasses clinking, louder than the polite murmurs of the city's richest people who suddenly seemed so small in this one bright corner of the ballroom. Then came the first clap. It was hesitant, just one pair of hands, near the back. Then another, near the bar. Then, slowly, as if someone had lifted a spell, more guests began to clap. The applause spread in ripples, bouncing off the polished wood and marble columns, rising above the music. Some of the guests smiled genuinely. A few even stood up. Amara glanced over her shoulder and saw Victor Hawthorne turning around, alerted by the sudden noise. His eyes narrowed when he saw them. His only son, the delicate boy he'd shielded behind doctors and tutors in silence, now spinning at the heart of his ballroom. Pushed by a young black waitress who didn't know her place, Victor's lips parted, ready to bark an order that would send Amara out the door for good. But the words never came. He saw Jamie's face, red-cheeked, eyes sparkling, a grin so wide it seemed to split his small face in two. And the laughter, sweet, free, unstoppable. Amara caught Victor's eye. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She squeezed Jamie's hand tighter, twirling him again. The boy leaned his head back and laughed at the chandeliers, the band, the world. For that brief, golden moment, it didn't matter that Victor was the richest man in the room. It didn't matter that whispers danced through the air like sparks. The only thing that mattered was that Jamie, for once in his short life, wasn't on the sidelines. He was right where he belonged, center stage, dancing under lights brighter than any money could buy. Amara knew she'd probably lose her job for this. But looking at Jamie's joy, feeling his small hand squeeze hers in gratitude he couldn't put into words, she knew she'd do it again in a heartbeat. And somewhere deep in the hush of the stunned crowd, a tiny seed of warmth cracked open inside Victor Hawthorne's chest. Though he'd never admit it out loud, the music rose again. Jamie laughed louder, and for one perfect song, the whole world danced with him. Victor turned when he heard the noise, a strange swell of clapping and soft laughter that didn't belong at his meticulously orchestrated gala. He expected polite applause for a speech or a toast, not this warm, rolling wave that tugged at the golden chandeliers and brushed against the velvet curtains. His eyes found the source instantly, his son, Jamie, his only child, his delicate heir, the boy Victor had shielded so fiercely from stares and whispers. And there he was, on the dance floor under a halo of light, spinning in his wheelchair like a small, bright planet in orbit around a young black waitress who clearly didn't know her place in this polished, merciless world. It first, rage flared in Victor's chest. Who dared touch his son? Who dared make a spectacle of Jamie's frailty? His mouth twisted, ready to bark an order that would stop this nonsense at once and remind the staff, who paid for every crumb on their plates. But then, Jamie laughed. Not the small, careful giggle Victor sometimes coaxed out of him with expensive gifts or forced family photos. This was real, pure, a sound that cracked the brittle walls Victor had built around the boy and himself. For the first time in years, Victor saw something he'd never truly seen before. His son's face, free of strain and worry, glowing like a lantern against the cold marble walls. Victor took one step forward, then froze, his eyes locked with Amara's. She was kneeling beside Jamie, one hand on his small shoulder, the other guiding the wheelchair in a slow, graceful arc. She didn't flinch under Victor's hard stare. She didn't stop. She only turned back to Jamie, smiling so gently that something inside Victor buckled. The jazz band played softer now, as if they too understood that they were part of something more important than another Billionaire's gala. Guests crowded the edge of the floor. Some still whispered, "Does Victor know? Will he fire her on the spot?" But others simply watched, transfixed by the tiny miracle unfolding in front of them. Victor's fists unclenched. He heard his father's voice in his head. "Control everything, Victor. Control is love." But watching Jamie's eyes shimmer as he spun under the chandeliers, Victor felt the lie in that lesson like a cold blade pressed to his throat. His iron heart cracked. Just enough for something warm to leak through. The song drifted toward its end, soft cymbal brushes, a fading saxophone, the upright bass humming a last gentle chord. Amara leaned down and whispered something into Jamie's ear, her lips brushing his sandy hair. Whatever she said, Jamie's eyes shone so brightly, it was as if he held his own galaxy in that tiny body. He nodded, giggling, then looked up at his father. Victor came closer, his polished shoes almost silent on the marble floor. He saw the small tremor in Jamie's hand where it rested on the wheelchair armrest, the way Amara's fingers still gently steadied him. Victor's mind raced. What did he say? What could he say? He'd built a life where every problem had a price tag, every obstacle a contract. But this tiny moment of freedom, was priceless. "Dad," Jamie said, his voice wobbly but clear enough to silence the murmurs. He lifted his hand toward his father, beckoning. Victor knelt, emotion so foreign it almost unbalanced him. He placed one hand on Jamie's knee. He could see the small beads of sweat on his son's forehead, the flush of pure happiness. For a moment, Victor just let himself really look, at the child he'd hidden behind walls of wealth and control. "Did you see me, Dad?" Jamie asked. The question cracked Victor's chest open completely. "I saw you, son." Victor's voice was rough, edged with something unfamiliar. Guilt, wonder, maybe both. "You were amazing." Jamie leaned forward and did something that surprised them both. He pulled Victor into a clumsy hug. Victor froze, feeling the thin arms around his neck, so fragile, yet so strong. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, and hugged his son back, his expensive cufflinks brushing against the wheelchair's metal frame. When they pulled apart, Victor turned to Amara. She stood quietly, eyes wide but calm, as if she expected a scolding, a firing, maybe worse. Her hands were still at her sides. She didn't reach for her tray, didn't excuse herself. Victor searched her face, then Jamie's. He thought of his father's cold voice, of the lonely silence in their mansion, of the small, hollow victories he'd stacked like gold bricks around his heart. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, the words stiff but true. "Thank you for giving him this." Amara swallowed, then smiled, small, relieved, brave. "He did all the dancing," she said softly. "I just gave him a little push." Victor nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket for his wallet, his reflex to fix everything with money, but stopped. He knew, finally, that no stack of bills could pay for what Amara had given his son. A few minutes of being just a boy under the lights. No pity, no limits. Just music, laughter, and the freedom to belong to SO instead. Victor placed his hand on Jamie's shoulder and looked at Amara like she was the richest person in the room. And under the fading notes of the jazz band, the billionaire who thought he had everything realized he'd been wrong. Until tonight. "What did you say to him?" Victor asked, his voice softer than his usual bark. He almost didn't recognize the sound of it, so used to giving orders, closing deals, shutting people down with sharp words that left no room for warmth. Amara stood her ground, one hand still, resting protectively on Jamie's wheelchair. The crisp, white napkin tucked in her apron pocket fluttered slightly as she shifted her weight. She looked Victor straight in the eye, unafraid. "I told him," she said, her voice strong and sure, "that he's the best dance partner I've ever had." The words hung in the hush that had settled over the grand ballroom. The chandeliers still glittered overhead, the band's instruments rested quietly on their stands, and the well-heeled guests lingered around the edges, watching this small, private moment that somehow felt more important than any million-dollar deal they toasted that night. Victor swallowed hard. He could feel eyes on him, powerful men and women who had never seen Victor Hawthorne hesitate, let alone break. For the first time in over a decade, tears pricked his eyes, hot and unfamiliar. He didn't care if they saw. None of them mattered. Now, only the small boy in the wheelchair, his sandy hair sticking to his damp forehead, his smile wide and unburdened. Victor knelt beside Jamie, lowering himself until they were face to face. He took his son's small hand into his own, rough and cold from years of signing contracts and clenching fists. Jamie's fingers curled around his father's without fear. "Thank you," Victor whispered, his voice catching. He turned to Amara, blinking back the tears he no longer had the strength to hide. "Thank you for giving him this." Amara felt a warmth bloom in her chest. Relief, hope, a flicker of pride. She'd been terrified when she stepped onto that dance floor, pushing a boy she barely knew into a moment he'd never forget. She'd expected anger, punishment, maybe worse. But looking at Victor now, seeing the hard edges of his face soften, she knew it had all been worth it. Behind them, the guests began to drift away, murmuring to one another. But a few stayed, unable to tear themselves from the quiet magic of it all. Victor's mind raced through 1,000 thoughts, regrets piling up like bricks. Years wasted behind closed doors, moments he'd stolen from his own son in the name of protection. What good was money if it built walls so high that even laughter couldn't climb over them? He turned fully to Amara. "I want you to stay," he said, his voice steadier now, edged with the authority that had built empires. "Except, this time, it didn't feel cold. Not as a waitress. I want you here with Jamie. As his friend, his helper, whatever title you want. Just stay. Help him feel like this every day." Amara's breath caught in her throat. She glanced at Jamie, who was still beaming, his eyes bright with a hope that made her own eyes sting. She saw her brother Elijah in him, saw the life he could have had if someone had given him a chance to dance, to belong, to be seen. She nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. I'd love to. Jamie let out a tiny squeal of delight, a sound that made even the weary band members grin. He tugged on Victor's sleeve with surprising strength. Dance again, he asked, the words slurred but full of hope. Victor let out a choked laugh, wiping at his eyes. He glanced at Amara, who shrugged playfully. You heard the man, she teased. Your son wants an encore. Victor looked at the polished floor, at the glittering chandeliers, at the musicians waiting, quietly for a sign. And then he did something no one in that room would ever forget. Something the city's tabloids would write about for weeks, though none of them would get the real story right. Victor Hawthorne stood up, turned to the band, and gave them a single nod. The saxophone rose again, soft and sweet. The piano followed with gentle chords, like a heartbeat under the music. Amara leaned down, locking Jamie's wheelchair brakes just long enough for Victor to gently lift his son into his arms. For a second, Jamie's feet brushed the polished floor, awkward, wobbly, but Amara held one of Jamie's hands while Victor held the other, and together they swayed in a slow, clumsy circle. Jamie laughed, louder than before, as if his small voice could fill every lonely corner of the ballroom. That night didn't end with a final toast or a billionaire's speech. It ended with a father holding his son, a boy held safely between love and music, and a young waitress who reminded them both that freedom isn't something you buy, it's something you share, one brave dance at a time. And when the last note faded, Victor knew he'd never build another wall around his son again. Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss another inspiring story. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life forever. See you in the next one. Stay kind and keep believing in good people. Red Heart Sparkles.